Okay. Thank you, Andrew. So welcome everyone. This is a Konflux community call happening on May 14th. We have two topics. That said, if you have any other topic that you would like to talk about, please don't hesitate to add a topic to the Konflux community call document link provided in the comments. I will probably start from the ADR topic. So Eric, if you are here, and I will check if you are here. And you are here. Eric, what is this ADR about?
So it's actually not going to be me talking about this because I would be still in the spotlight from one of the Konflux GSOC students that we got for this year. So I just put the item on the agenda. And as you can see, it's to support a dual, or actually another compression type for the images that we're building in Konflux. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to my student Aman, whom I've seen on the call. So Aman, can you introduce this for us?
Hello, good evening, everyone. I'm Amit, and I'm doing GSOC this summer for Konflux for the project to support zstd chunk image compression. So to proceed with the ADR, I have a draft ADR, and I can share the PR link in the chat. I'll just take a second.
It's already in there. Adam put it in there.
Okay, thank you. So to give everyone a context about the problem, right now we know that Konflux compresses all the image layers with gzip. But as we know that zstd is a newer format built on a better algorithm, and it offers smaller compressed sizes. It offers faster decompression, and it also supports partial layer downloads. There are reports of up to 90% speed increase in larger image pools, for example, CUDA images, when we use the zstd. The problem with this that we cannot simply just use the compression format flag is that backward compatibility. Older Docker versions of before 2023, what they do is they try to read the zstd layers as gzip, and they fail with the error of invalid tar header. Other tools, however, they already support zstd. They have now support with zstd. Docker is our main blocker. So as described in the issue 1264, when we push both gzip and zstd variants to the same image index, it works as long as the gzip entries are listed first. And I have also attached the link to the OCI MD file. So we know that the client select the first entry which matches their platform, and so the old Docker clients will pick gzip, and the newer clients and Podman, they can read the zstd annotation automatically. This project was originally proposed in the issue 1264 in build definitions repo. And it also has additional demands in issue 3188 for larger CUDA images to add the force compression param too. And also in the PR 634 in a release service catalog, there was a comment added to stating that we will need a zstd layer handling later on in the Pixis task. So this is about the context of the project. Coming to the decision, if we talk about what we'll be doing, In the decision, I want to add a dual compression setting to the build pipeline, basically pushing both the gzip and zstd chunk formats from build task and expose both the digests as results. Uh, the problem again with this is that dual compression risks breaking release pipeline tasks because they expect one manifest per architecture. So they need deduplication fixes before we can uh, merge them or change the default. Coming to the implementation details, if I talk about the builder task, will need to have two new parameters. One will be compression format. It will have values either gzip or zstd chunk or dual. And another param will be force compression, which is when set to true, will recompress all the layers, including the base image layers, basically for the larger base image layers. And in the dual mode, uh, the push step will push the image twice. First, it will push with gzip, and after that, it will push with compression format set as zstd chunk. Each push will produce a different manifest digest, and the annotation is we know that it is added at the okay. So we know that Podman and Cryo will prefer the ZSTD variant automatically. So, and also image digest will always hold the primary digest because we will send the gzip in dual or gzip mode and only ZSTD when the mode is ZSTD chunk. So the downstream task will never see an empty result. And in the dual mode, the ZSTD digest is additionally exposed as image digest ZSTD. We also know that tecton chains match the result name suffixes, so it will generate provenance for both variants without any changes in its code. The build image index task will get a ZSTD images array, and during index creation, we will first add the gzip images and then ZSTD images to enforce the ordering. The images result continues to collect all digests via inspect. And with dual compression, it includes all the 2N digests, which are already handled by chains for provenance. There are some release tasks in release service catalog that call the get image architectures utility, and it loops over all the manifest. So with dual compression, they will actually see duplicate entries per architecture, and we will have to add a deduplication filter that groups by OS and only keeps the non-ZSTD entries. The ZSTD manifests remain in released image index and are available for the pull. The filter only prevents duplicate metadata for fixes and advisory content and to solve the kernel modules task. Signing tasks, however, are not affected. They sign all the manifests in the index, and which should not be a problem. Also, the default value of compression format will stay gzip until we fix the release tasks. Only then will the default change to dual. Once dual compression adoption is stable and older Docker versions are no longer a concern, the default can move to ZSTD chunk only in future. There were a few alternatives that were discussed in the issue 1264, all by maintainers. One of which was to add compression at the index push time, basically use the add compression flag and create ZSTD variants at index push time. The problem with this flow was that the ZSTD manifests are created during manifest push in the build image index task, and they are not a result of a task win. So chains cannot generate provenance for them. And at release time, Confirma would probably block the release. Another alternative that was considered was to introduce intermediary tasks, but that again added complexity, a new task definition, and a new cycle. So we had to eliminate that too. Coming to the consequences, we have some pros and some cons. Pros are that the pulls will be faster for modern clients, and the modern clients will automatically benefit from zstd chain without changing the pipeline config. We will have the full backward compatibility. That is, older Docker clients will continue to work because gzip is listed first in the image index. Provenance and signing, they both variants get a provenance contract on chains and are signed by cosign, so no changes needed to chains or confirm. There are a few cons that the image will contain 2 times the manifest of n, and I think that will be within the Tecton's result limit. Because it is 4096 byte, I think that should fit within the limit. The second con is that registry storage will roughly double because each layer is stored in both gzip and zstd variants. So users who do not want this can keep compression format to gzip. Build will usually take longer in dual mode. The zstd push recompresses all layers, adding time proportional to the image size. Release pipeline tasks have to be updated, and before we can switch to a dual SD port. So that's about the ADR.
Thank you, Aman, for the introduction. So I'll try to summarize it for everyone. So I think 2 main drivers for this would be not just the new compression algorithm on the horizon, but we have been dealing with a rising number of really huge containers. You know, when you include CUDA, or you have images that bundle or artifacts that bundle LLMs, these, you know, add up quite quickly. So sooner or later, we definitely need to handle it in one way or the other. We already got some initial comments on the draft from Adam Smil, which is amazing. So we can continue experimenting. This is going to include heavy experimentation, but I wanted Aman to open a pull request for the ADR as soon as possible, before, you know, the coding period for GSOC officially starts, for 2 reasons. One is we're now officially in the, or closing the community bonding period that ends next week sometime. So I thought, you know, it would be a great idea to expose, you know, oneself as a contributor to the community by showcasing what they're going to work on. And second is that proposal for GSOC is one thing, but we really want to have as many details as possible ironed out before the coding period starts, because the coding period is only 12 weeks. So we've got a ton of work to do. And it's not just coding. We are already, you know, we also have somewhat of an issue that what if the contributor doesn't possess, you know, the necessary hardware? So we are trying to solve that as well, trying to find ways of limiting resources, finding suitable configuration. So so that's all happening during this community bonding period. And by that, oh yeah, there's one more note on this. When Aman mentioned, and there are reports that this is already kind of working, and that like it can reach very, you know, great speed savings. The reports that he was referencing originally come from Fedora. where Fedora proposed to start pushing all Fedora container images using zstd chunk, starting in Fedora 41. Unfortunately, that has changed since, and recently I actually found several threads interlinked where one of them eventually led to a Fedora wiki page where they said that a proposal to use the STD was actually rejected. Like, not rejected completely, rejected in the sense for using it for Fedora 41, but it's still on the table. And I've seen, people actively exploring this, last year. So the important detail here is that it has not been rejected completely, but at the same time, we are kind of pioneers of this because we do not have an analogy to draw from, really, that we could learn from. So which is sad, but yeah, it's going to be a lot of experimenting going on. Last words, I would like everyone who has something to say about this, architects, wing, to provide us with some valuable comments on top of what Adam already told us, so that we can deliver some good quality work, and if nothing else, then at least very strong experimenting that we can use as data in the future. So yeah, I guess that's all from me and Aman, and now we can take some comments or move on to a different item on the agenda. Adam, back to you.
Yeah, so are there any comments, concerns, or anyone who wants to say something right now? Adam Kaplan, please go.
Just want to say welcome to the community. Taking on an ADR like this is no easy feat. So I want to say, I guess, congratulations for this kind of achievement. I think Eric, also kudos to you for your encouragement, getting this sort of ball rolling. I think just great stuff all around. I started looking at the draft. I'll probably put my comments just right there in GitHub. A lot of those things probably work best for offline. Yeah, it's just good stuff and not an easy problem to solve. So the other point, Eric, and I think you bring up a good one, is about Fedora. And I guess my question, since they're a stakeholder here, is there a concern from Fedora, just like what's sort of expressed here, the ADR, in terms of backwards compatibility, making sure that either older Docker clients or older Build-A clients or Podman clients are able to consume whatever is coming out of this pipeline? Or do we need to maybe think about having effectively like a new variant of the build pipeline, build task that's only producing ZTSD chunked and not worrying about gzip?
I'm starting to worry about the latter, actually. So Fedora, they didn't reject it because of backwards compatibility. As far as I remember, and there have been many comments that I read on that, was that the tooling they use in their pipelines has supported ZSTD, at that time already for 5 years. So it's not a problem of tooling, so they don't really care. They assume that everything that is happening should be new enough, and what they're trying to figure out is actually the plumbing in their cloud image builder, or like what they call it, in their pipeline that produces all those images. So I suppose that's where we are as well. Then we need to figure out how exactly we're going to plumb this together.
Great. No other comments from me.
Okay, in that case, Adam, you actually have the second topic. So you don't have to turn off that camera.
Or my microphone. Okay, give me 1 moment. And then I want to share my screen a little bit. So my comment is about the build service, and this is really more, I want to start to give some context, and certainly for like Aman's case, because there's a bit of history that goes like behind the naming of the things and how components are organized. And the build service is one where there's kind of an artifact of, I guess, well, this is like my take. So feel free to chime in if I've got things wrong here. But before we were Konflux, this was actually 2 different projects that kind of merged together. And the build service, to my recollection, was kind of one of those things that helped glue those 2 different projects together. It was utilizing the component API that came out of this thing called the hybrid application service, but then it was kind of like adding and augmenting it to do the role that it has today, which it's really about. And based on the README that I generated this README through cloud analysis plus feedback from the maintainers. To me, it feels a lot more about component lifecycle than sort of just build per se. It does have an important role around build pipeline pruning, where if a component's deleted, any of its associated pipeline runs are also kind of deleted. That's maybe a little less of a concern because now we are archiving pipelines either through Tecton results or kubearchive. The really important thing that it's got doing today is really around dependency updates and nudging. That's, to me, kind of like a core thing out within Konflux, as well as helping this with the setup for pipelines as code and that level of integration. Like that setup also feels like it's a kind of like important role. The thing that I'm kind of started thinking about, long term, there's kind of 2 things. One, since we're working on reimagining that sort of component API, adding things like the component groups API, whether or not those APIs should actually live here, those CRD should be defined here, and that the build service effectively becomes the owner of the component API, whatever new component API we have. And 2, the part around pipeline provisioning and sort of that onboarding experience that this component provides, I actually wonder if that's something that should be spun out into its own add-on effectively, so that we can consider other means that code can be onboarded to Konflux. Some things that kind of come to mind are using, say, Backstage and Backstage software templates as a way of effectively onboarding a component to Konflux, especially since I think we do have a Backstage plugin for Backstage that is under development. I'm thinking too about some of the things that I'm doing with Java and Maven, where in order to get yourself fully onboarded to have a secure Java build experience, you actually have to make code changes to the project definition itself. And that's something where like the current automated pipeline provisioning component might need to be extended so that it isn't just adding the Tecton definition, but also is going to do like some level of code analysis, maybe have some agentic component to it where it's going to use an LLM to help correctly put the right pieces in place and do the right generation. So that's just kind of general thoughts. I'm happy to sort of open the floor to the conversation. I see Kruno and Bikola already have their hands up, which is great. So I'd love to hear kind of what folks think.
Yeah, so as to regards to component dependency updates, as part of the migration to the new component group model, we are now working on moving that logic into the integration service.
Okay, so that part sounds like will be going away. Okay, so that's probably maybe something worth potentially adding. I don't know if it's worth adding in the README since that's kind of like in progress, but it's that's kind of good to know. Mikola, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. So I agree with you, Adam. So the name was created historically because back then build service was indeed responsible for builds. It actually created build pipelines in the cluster at the beginning. We removed that mode, I guess, a few years ago because we switched to completely event-driven solution. But yeah, the name still remained. So I don't have honestly strong opinion on this. Yes, build service current name is somewhat confusing because the service itself doesn't handle majority of the builds. Regarding build perspective, in terms of running build pipelines, so build service only can trigger rerun pipeline for push commits as of now. So that's the only point where we directly triggering a build pipeline in the cluster. However, build service is a key component to set up the whole build infrastructure. Like you correctly mentioned that it prepares component to be onboarded to Konflux. Basically, it does the onboarding for the component, including creating a lot of resources within cluster, making sure that they are correctly configured in different places, including permissions, service accounts, pull secrets that are needed for component dependency updates, also known as nudges. Also, it configures Git repos to set the webhook when needed. You also have it, webhook management. So yeah, it works around component, and in the new model, it does own it. But yeah, it prepares everything to make build happen. But it doesn't do actual builds. And here is like confusion because from one point it doesn't do actual builds except the retrigger. From the other side, it does everything to make build happen. So I don't know honestly the answer to this question. So we need to think probably offline on it. But yeah, I like the idea. So component service sounds good to me too. So I'm not against it. So yeah, that would take some routine, but yeah, we should think, I believe, offline on it more. I'm not ready to answer right now, but yeah, thank you, Adam, for raising this.
We've got Ryan and Adam O.
Yeah, so I have two different points I want to make. The first one is that one thing you mentioned when you were proposing this is the idea of possibly moving the component CR into the build service entirely rather than having it be a shared CR. That's something I think is probably a discussion that should be separate from the one we're having now. But I do want to mention that broadly speaking, I think it'd probably be a good thing to have fewer shared CRDs. And have more direct ownership over those, in particular the integration service should probably own the snapshot CRD entirely as well. That would make a lot of things with our workflow and our updates easier. That's like going back to the question at hand, which is renaming the build service. I think it's important to consider kind of user perspective here. And while it is maybe a little confusing that the build service doesn't directly do the building, there's still this kind of overall workflow in a CI/CD service of like you build and you test and you release. And we have a build service, an integration test service. It's not quite super well named, and a release service. And that kind of like clearly defines that workflow. Whereas if we rename it to the component service, it kind of ends up feeling like this extra thing, like, oh, what is this thing hanging around on my cluster? I don't really know what the component service does. I think the components are an implementation detail of building, and of managing builds and managing those atomic units which we build. And I don't think we necessarily want to couple them together in the naming.
Valid point. Adam O.
Please, if you want to have first
No, I
comments.
like I don't have any direct comment other than I think that is a good, also excellent overall framing of what we're doing here.
Like I kind of I would like us to rename the service, because I believe it is much closer to what it actually is. And the build service, like calling it build service, can also lead to many a lot of confusion on part of like Konflux administrators, because now we have a service that's called build service, but it's actually not doing too much with the build, even though it's making it sure that it will happen. My question is like, and that's towards Mikola, probably he knows best, or some other folks from build team, like how hard would it be to rename it? Like if there are some like technical challenges, or it's more like a chore to rename it in the documentation and stuff.
Well, I don't see blockers, but some work would be needed.
Yeah, then probably Andrew can.
Well, I mean, I have a separate comment. I think that there's definitely some naming of our controllers which originated in prior designs of this thing that's not Konflux. I mentioned in the sidebar, image controller has also come up related to this. It's not a generic image controller; it's more of a Quay image controller. And like how I see build service, how I've tried to phrase build service in the past, is more of a service to assist with configurations. So this is your initial pipelines as code configuration, which is push to the repository, configurations of the service accounts, because it creates your service accounts, and with how the component model is working out, it actually is a way to help to configure things on your repository CR as well, with only allowing certain properties to be defined. And I think that build service is generally a bad name because it does none of the building, and it hides the fact that the builds and is done by the workload that is Tekton, and it's all the integrations kind of are driven by pipelines as code, with the exception of I think that you can annotate a component to trigger a rebuild. So that's like one situation where it's not just a configuration, it does trigger a build. Or either annotate or label a component to trigger a rebuild post merge. So it does definitely create confusion, and it also creates confusion that, like, I think we still have references to pipeline service, which isn't really a thing either. I think that was an encapsulation of Tekton that we had before, but we're not really doing that. Ryan, to your point about like CI/CD having build, test, and release, I think that, well, I've had comments in the past to some folks, but I haven't tried to convince people otherwise. I think that, like, one of the things that the integration service controller essentially does in my mind is it is CR driven eventing for Tekton. There's a lot of overlap there between integration, the integration service, and the release service controllers as well. So, like, I think that this isn't just something that, like, focused now on the conversation with build service, but if we also think back to how we got here, there are likely other instances where the reality now doesn't necessarily line up with the structure of the organization we have now. I just wanted to add a bit with that mention of pipeline service, more to just put some of the lore here on the record. I think there are certainly a lot of people here who were probably through that, or some people were here through all of that, but there are certainly, especially like Aman, who's just joining, other folks who have joined the community as we've been building it. So to like kind of understand like where all these things came from, I do kind of want to say what we meant by pipeline service. So I think this is probably what, 4 years ago now, Mikola, at this point, when I was talking about those aforementioned two different services, or two different services that were kind of combined together. There was a vision at one point where those two services would be sharing effectively a third service that was basically just responsible for operating Tekton, and operating Tekton as kind of like a managed service. Sort of, you could almost think of it like providing a GitHub Actions, but through Tekton. And so that's where pipeline service was initially kind of born. The architecture was very fundamentally different. We were doing some very bleeding edge things with KCP at one point, kind of very wild days for a while. But ultimately what's emerged and what we kind of have today is, you know, Konflux that runs on a single Kubernetes cluster. And we discovered with time that really all we needed for the Tekton piece was to actually just deploy Tekton. And then someone is just operating Tekton. And so that's what we have today, where what is the pipeline service is really just the Tekton operator deploying core Tekton pipelines as code, and Tekton chains. And Tekton chains, Tekton results 2, I think that's the one where we're kind of having the active debate around Tekton results and kubearchive, but that's not part of this conversation. Just good kind of info background for folks to have.
So maybe like now the devious question, what should we do now? Is this a, let's say, should there be a follow-up within the build team as you own the operator about the name, or like how should we proceed?
I would say, I guess no matter what, it probably warrants an ADR to like hash out some of these details, particularly even just the simple renaming the Git repo, right? Don't change anything else, just rename the Git repo. What are the consequences of that, and working through that? You know, I think of, you know, if we go down this path just, you know, of eventually renaming things, then too, that I think affects the components that get deployed, documentation. It's a lot of stuff that I think Mikola rightfully characterized as chores, but they're very important chores to make sure that what we're communicating to the world and to adopters, consumers, makes sense. I think too, with the operator, because we do now have that Konflux operator, if we're renaming things, we'll also need to potentially bake in logic so that like on upgrade, the old components get deleted and the new components come online. And potentially there might be some risk that we don't handle that handover gracefully.
So maybe the question towards you, Adam, like, will you take the action item to follow up on this? Like mainly probably, like what I see right now is mainly the conversation within the build team. That, okay, do we even want to entertain this thought? And then if yes, then we can have the discussion, okay, like how much it would cost us to do it, and then you can make decision. Then you can make decision based on that.
Yep, I think that makes the most sense. Working with them directly, and then drafting an ADR together, if this is something that we want to
do. Obviously, please, when you have these like, okay, we are doing it or we are not doing it, can you also like bring this topic to the community call? Just like, what was the decision? I honestly, me myself would like to know, and I think it is interesting sort of question if we should rename bunch of our operators and I don't know what, like that can be multiple things to better match what we actually do. Like maybe we can even have a discussion if we should. I'm thinking out loud. Should we rename InMaker to dependency management service just to make it easier for people to see what it is? Maybe we can have this discussion. Okay, Ryan, I saw that you raised your hand. So.
Oh, never mind. You covered it.
Yeah. And honestly, I think that now with the new model, maybe now is the time if you want to do something like this to do it. Because
yeah, I think I'll be honest. That was kind of my motivation too. Is like since we have this new model that's coming, I think this is kind of like the right moment to do it, to introduce this kind of change. Since we're already introducing other kind of, I guess we could phrase it a bit as like breaking changes, since there's like new APIs that we're going to be using and old APIs that we're going to be effectively deprecating and retiring. So,
I mean, it's mental model breaking in a way, right? Like if you're going to confuse everyone a little bit, you might as well confuse everyone a little bit more for the long-term benefit.
Yeah, I agree. So it's, if you want to do it, better to do it now while we transition into the new model. And also we have a decision before about labels and annotations on the object, but work is not started at all on those. So it's also a good time to do it, but it would be way harder than just renaming build service. Trust me.
Actually, Andrew, like you pointed like a good thing that I myself wanted to ask, if we should also rename integration service to like group.
So
yeah.
I was considering this as well. I think there's a problem here. We could call it the component group or the snapshot service or something like that, but the integration service also kind of serves as glue between the other main services. So it's kind of more than just managing like component groups, because we also watch build pipelines and handle the completed build pipelines, and we also create releases if they need to be created. So that one's a bit more nebulous, I think.
Okay.
I mean, I don't. We have some time. I don't think there's anything else on the agenda. I don't want to distract from the conversation with the build service too much, unless we want to do it. But Ryan, to that point a little bit, and kind of a little more information about what I was saying before. I know that integration and release services, we've been having questions about coupling with the snapshot. Both of them that depend on it. This has come into question with like kubearchive as well. Kubearchive wants certain things, wants connections to be made between integration and release services, and integration and release are coupled by the snapshot. If we look at coupling, and especially coupling that's hard to untangle, that begs the question: should these actually be a single service? And so, one of the things that I know that I've talked about to some folks in the past is that, like in what I was alluding to earlier, integration and release, they're both kind of these CR-driven tech-down eventing mechanisms. The integration service primarily is focused on taking or reacting to the build and scheduling one or more pipeline runs in response to that, to also create these additional CRs, which it uses for internal and external tracking because of the dependencies with the release service. And then the release service, it's similarly, it creates pipeline runs either in the same namespace or in separate namespaces. You again have ordering between pipeline runs across namespaces, where maybe you have ones in separate namespaces running in parallel. If you have a tenant release and a managed release pipeline, or you have them running one after another with managed release in the finally pipeline. And so like I see that these are doing a lot of the same things. They both have pipeline references that they try and resolve to run these pipelines. You have overrides in both of them as well. And so like there is a lot of duplication that these different controllers are doing. And we have these coupling challenges. And so if we're making changes, does it make sense for this to be an opportunity for us to take advantage of in a way of we're already breaking people's mental model? Why not just simplify the maintenance of all these different controllers, reduce the multitude of controllers, prevent ourselves from having to implement the same features across multiple controllers as well.
So if I may start first, I don't. First off, yeah, I think that the integration name is a compromise, but I think that it does kind of explain what the integration service does, where it doesn't only run integration testing, which is why it's not called integration testing service. It integrates the disparate parts of the Konflux workflow and allows, when you start from a component build, to basically tie it together all the way to the release. I do not agree that, like, well, there is some overlap with creating Tecton pipelines and things like that. I think that's basically the simplest part of what each service or each of our services does, including the build service. Creating Tecton pipelines is just a common language that we use and a common mechanism. But most of the big business logic of each of the services, including build, integration, and release, is very much very, very different. And controllers handle a lot of the different resources and have different jobs within the workflow. So I'm definitely not for merging either the build service or the integration with the release. I think that the biggest overlap is with the integration service creating automated releases, and we've been discussing for a long time already that it would be a good idea to move this part of the logic into the release service, which would then, I think, give us more well-defined domains of which service does what.
Yeah, Bruno, that's an interesting point about the name being integrating the services rather than integration testing. I wanted to mention to Andrew, because you made some really good points about the overlap between the integration and release service. I think what we want to look at here would be in the past, and I don't know if this is something we still care about, but in the past we had a goal of users being able to deploy only the pieces of Konflux that they want to achieve the goals they want. So if they want to build things in Konflux to do nothing else, they can deploy, I guess as it stands right now, pipelines as code and the build service and the image controller. There may be some other things, but regardless, they could deploy the things required for building, but not deploy the integration service, not deploy the release service, handle all that separately. Or if they want to just create releases through Konflux, they could just deploy the release service and then do all their building and testing separately, and then create release CRs that says, hey, release this thing that's been built and tested elsewhere. If that's something that we still want, this idea of atomicity of functions, I think it's important to keep controllers small, even if we do have some overlap, so that users do have that flexibility. If not, and we want Konflux to be used as a whole, and we don't really, it doesn't seem to be a common use case that users want to divide up Konflux, then maybe that's something that we don't really consider. But yeah.
I mean, I think that there is, because of the coupling between integration and release, it's a lot harder to just use release without integration, or just use integration. Or I mean, I think it's probably a lot harder to use just release without integration, because then you have no snapshots that are created. And so, like, sure, we want to have services that are uncoupled, but we haven't been able to decouple integration and release largely around this data object that's used to transfer the component metadata between services. Where I haven't followed the details with the component group change, but I feel like, or is it true that we still have a snapshot because the release service needs a snapshot?
We do, yeah, and because it's useful for integration testing.
So I mean, like, that would become an internal, either an internal implementation detail between this merge controller. You would have a lot more flexibility in being able to update the controller if you want to change what that resource actually means. But in this space where you merge the integration and release controllers together to be some new kind of controller, you still can just deploy this pipelines. You still can just deploy this configuration controller. You still can just deploy this some form of triggering controller. And each of them can clearly be done on their own. You don't have that question of, do I actually have this dependency between multiple controllers?
Kruno, if you don't mind, I want to just hop in and say one thing before we before you say that, which is that I think the reason we haven't been able to decouple integration and release is that there hasn't been a ton of work that's gone into it. There's been a lot of conversation, but I mean, it took the new component group model to really begin to decouple the build and integration services. And per your point about snapshots, there's parts of the snapshot CRD that are coupled to the component CRD that we needed to pull apart. So I think it might take a similarly large effort if we really want to decouple things to do so. But I think it's a question of which direction we want to go and how much work is it worth, rather than is it possible at all. I think the snapshot issue is surmountable.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, basically, a snapshot CR is just a structure that we use to communicate that we want this group of component images to be worked with, either tested or released or whatever. If there were a more widely accepted standard, like the way that we have Tecton pipeline runs as the way of communication between the build service and the integration service, so there's much less coupling there, or basically almost none at this point. The same could be done between the integration service and the release, but there is no industry standard or even an emergent standard for coupling stuff. But that's why we have the snapshot as the way of communication. But I'd say that merging integration and the release service, with their huge amounts of business logic within both of them, would end up in a huge monolith, which would be very much harder to manage and test and work with.
Sorry, I didn't mean to derail the conversation. It's something that I know I've talked about. I wasn't really necessarily ready to talk about it today, so I probably should have stayed quiet. But I talked about it anyway, and maybe we'll talk about it again.
No, it's all right. So we have a plan for the where to go with the question specifically about build service and the component service. Do we maybe want to also talk about on the next meeting? Because I heard two things. One was better separation of CRDs between the components, which could maybe go be a problematic, because then we could end up with more CRDs, which is a problem for etcd. So maybe we can have that conversation. And we want to follow up on this conversation about maybe more decoupling or more renaming. That's a question. Okay. Okay, so thank you folks for attending this call, and see you in a week. And have a great day.
I thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.